It looks like just a sweater, right? It's simple, ordinary, forgettable. But in Miranda Priestly's world, nothing is ever just ordinary. That little blue sweater in Andy's hands carried an entire history of fashion, power, and influence she never even noticed. Until Miranda decided to teach her. Andy sat in the office of Runway magazine, clutching the sweater in her hands. To her, it was nothing special. Just another piece of clothing she had pulled out of her closet without a second thought. The sweater wasn't flashy, it wasn't stylish, and it certainly wasn't what the glamorous world of fashion revolved around. In Andy's mind, it was just blue, nothing more. She didn't see the point of everyone fussing over clothes when her world had always been about words, stories, and journalism. Her expression betrayed that casual indifference. She smirked softly, almost as if the sweater itself was proof of how little she cared about the glossy magazine culture surrounding her. In her heart, she thought fashion was shallow, unnecessary, trivial compared to the real issues she wanted to write about. But in the room, silence grew heavy. Miranda Priestly, the formidable editor-in-chief, watched Andy with piercing eyes from behind her desk. Miranda's presence was icy yet commanding. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her authority filled the room like a storm waiting to strike. Everyone else in the office froze. Assistants stopped shuffling papers. Stylists avoided eye contact. They all knew what was coming. Andy's dismissive smirk was like a spark in a room filled with gasoline. Miranda never let ignorance slide, especially when it came from someone under her roof. Miranda adjusted her glasses with a slow, deliberate motion, her face perfectly composed. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a small gesture. To everyone in the room, it was the warning sign. The calm before the inevitable lesson. Andy, oblivious, kept her tone light. It's just a sweater. What's the big deal? That was it. Those few words were the opening Miranda needed. The very idea that Andy could reduce something so carefully chosen, so deeply rooted in the world of fashion, to just a sweater was an insult not only to Miranda, but to the entire machinery of an industry Andy didn't even try to understand. Atmosphere thickened. Miranda's silence lasted long enough for Andy to shift in her chair, suddenly unsure if she had said too much. And then finally, Miranda spoke. Her voice was low, calm, but cutting like ice. That is not just a sweater. The words sliced through the air. Andy blinked, confused, as Miranda leaned forward ever so slightly. The power in her tone wasn't from volume, but from precision. Miranda spoke as though she were unwrapping Andy's ignorance piece by piece, exposing it to the entire room. Every person watching, every assistant, every stylist knew this was more than a correction. This was a lesson, the kind of brutal education only Miranda Priestly could deliver. Andy looked down at the sweater. Again, same fabric, same color. Nothing had changed, yet everything suddenly felt heavier. She didn't realize it yet. But Miranda was about to turn that simple piece of clothing into a mirror reflecting Andy's blind spots. Her arrogance and the invisible power of fashion that shaped lives without permission. The sweater sat there, like a challenge. To Andy, it was still harmless, almost laughable. She didn't yet understand that her casual dismissal was a spark thrown into dry kindling. Miranda Priestly finally moved. A shift of her hand, a slight tilt of her chin, and suddenly the air in the office changed. Assistants who had been quietly typing slowed their keystrokes, as if sound itself might offend her in this moment. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed too loud. Her eyes lifted slowly from the pages in front of her. Twin pools of frost locking on Andy. That gaze was sharper than any scolding could ever be. Miranda didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence alone made the room hold its breath. Andy fidgeted, sweater still in her lap. I mean, it's just blue, she added, trying to defend her earlier comment. The words came out light, almost careless. But her confidence was already cracking under the weight of Miranda's stare. Miranda removed her glasses with deliberate grace, placed them neatly on the desk. That single motion was louder than shouting. It was ritual, a warning, the subtle choreography of power. She leaned back, her voice calm but edged like a blade drawn in velvet. It's not just blue, it's cerulean. Syllables hung in the air, slow and exact. The word cerulean rolled out like a verdict, as though Miranda were correcting not only Andy's vocabulary, but her entire worldview. Andy blinked. To her it was still blue, just blue. A sweater she had thrown on without a thought. Yet the way Miranda said it transformed the color into something elevated. Something untouchable, Miranda continued, her tone precise, almost surgical. You see, that sweater is not a mistake. It is not a coincidence. And it most certainly is. Not just blue. It is cerulean, shade carefully chosen, debated, designed, and defended. Visuals unfold in Andy's mind, or maybe Miranda's words were so powerful that they painted themselves into the room. Runway lights flickered in the imagination. Models walked draped in silken fabrics of dazzling cerulean. The color shimmered. Like an idea being born, not a dye poured into wool. Miranda's voice carried on, steady and merciless. Oscar de la Renta showed cerulean gowns in his collection of What Was It? 2002, Yves Saint Laurent soon followed, sending it down the runway in a series of military jackets. From there, the shade cascaded, captured, stolen, copied. Suddenly, it was everywhere. The color of a season, the anthem of elegance. Her hand made the smallest gesture toward Andy's sweater, as if she were pointing to evidence of a crime. And then it trickled down. Designers across the industry mimicked it. Department stores chased it. Soon enough, it was filtered through the clearance racks of mid-level retailers. Whittled down into something cheap enough, diluted enough, to arrive in your hands. That sweater you think you chose was chosen for you? The office was still. Andy sat frozen. Miranda's voice had grown no louder. Yet the force of it filled the room. Do you understand? Miranda asked, not really as a question, but as an indictment. Millions of dollars, thousands of decisions, entire careers built or destroyed. You sit here pretending it is just a sweater, pretending that fashion does not matter. Andy tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. The sweater, once ordinary, now felt unbearably heavy in her lap. It wasn't fabric anymore. It was history. It was proof of how much she didn't know. Miranda leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to pierce deeper. What you fail to grasp, Andrea, is that fashion is not about frivolity. It is about influence. And influence trickles down until it stains even the clothes of those who believe they are immune. The assistants nearby dared not move. One adjusted her pen quietly, as if even the scrape of plastic might set Miranda's gaze upon her. Own silence grew unbearable. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to argue, but what defense could she give? So she didn't care? That fashion wasn't her world? That sweater in her hands told a different story now. Miranda reclined back into her chair, the faintest sigh escaping her lips, not of exhaustion, but of certainty. She had made her point, and Andy's stunned face was proof enough. Yet Miranda's monologue wasn't just about a sweater, and everyone in the room knew it. It was about power, the power to see what others could not, the power to shape culture, define taste, dictate worth. To Andy, it had seemed trivial. To Miranda, it was the very air they breathed. The sweater was no longer a garment, it was a symbol, a reminder that ignorance was not innocence, it was weakness. And Miranda Priestly had no patience for weakness. The word cerulean still echoed in the air like a bell struck in silence. Andy sat frozen, sweater gripped in her hands, while Miranda continued. Her tone didn't rise, but her words grew sharper, richer, almost intoxicating. Fashion is not random, Miranda said, her eyes fixed on Andy as though she were lecturing. A student who had dared to challenge the master. It is a chain. A current, a system built on vision and power. What you think of as choice is nothing more than the end result of decisions made by people you will never meet. As Miranda spoke, her words painted an invisible montage. Faceless designers hunched over sketches, their hands trembling as they outlined bold new ideas. Seamstresses stitched fabric under the glow of studio lights. Runways flashed alive with models moving like ghosts across a sea of photographers. The world's eyes hungry for a glimpse of what would define the next season. And then the trickle began. Fashion houses whispered. Critics published their reviews. Buyers selected what to push into stores. Each layer of the industry carried the color forward, filtering it, translating it for the masses. What began as a daring statement on the runway eventually diluted into wearable pieces, then cheaper copies, until finally, there it was folded on a sale rack, waiting for someone like Andy to pluck it out without a thought. Miranda's voice grew icier. That sweater was not chosen by you, Andrea. It was chosen for you. Long before you walked into that shop, long before you dismissed it as nothing special. A series of choices ensured that Cerulean would be sitting there, waiting. You think you're above it? You think you've avoided fashion? But you are wearing its influence right now. Andy shifted uncomfortably, staring down at the sweater. In her mind, she tried to picture how many people had touched this color before her, how many meetings, how many arguments in design studios, how many contracts signed. She had never thought of clothing as anything more than fabric, yet here Miranda was, unraveling the invisible web woven through every stitch. Miranda leaned back slightly, but her words pressed forward like a tide. This is what people like you never understand. Fashion is not just about clothes. It is about culture, about history, about identity. It reflects what we fear, what we desire, what we pretend to ignore, but secretly crave. When a designer chooses a color, they are not just selecting pigment. They are choosing the future. They are dictating what will be seen, what will be worn, and what will be forgotten. For a moment, the office felt like a courtroom, and Miranda was the judge delivering a verdict. Andy, the defendant, had no defense. The sweater was evidence. Enough around them, the assistant sat stiff, almost afraid to breathe. They had heard this tone before. They knew Miranda wasn't merely speaking to Andy. She was reminding everyone in earshot why she sat at the top of the fashion world. Miranda's eyes softened, just slightly, not out of kindness, but calculation. And here you are, Andrea, benefiting from that system without acknowledging it. Walking into my office with the arrogance to believe you are untouched by fashion. That sweater says otherwise. Andy's cheeks burned. She wanted to argue, but every word caught in her throat. She had underestimated Miranda, underestimated this entire world she had stepped into. To Andy, fashion had been shallow. To Miranda, it was a force that shaped reality itself. The silence that followed was heavy. Miranda had laid bare the truth. Andy wasn't outside of fashion. She was already a part of it, whether she liked it or not, and the sweater in her hands would forever be a reminder of that. The office was still. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, yet even that sound felt swallowed by the silence. Miranda had left behind. A knee sat frozen, sweater heavy in her lap, her pulse quickening. Every word Miranda had spoken replayed in her mind like a series of blows. Cerulean, legacy, history, power. Words that had sounded so abstract when she first walked into runway now pressed down on her like invisible hands. Pinning her to the chair, for the first time, Andy realized she wasn't laughing, not even on the inside. The sweater had transformed. In front of her eyes, it wasn't just something she had tossed on that morning, it was proof. Proof that she had been blind to the influence wrapping around her life. Miranda, of course, didn't gloat. That wasn't her way. Instead, she sat reclined in her chair, hands folded, expression unreadable. It was as though she had just explained the weather, or reminded someone of a fact so obvious it should never have been questioned. Yet the stillness of her face only made the lesson sting more. To Miranda, this wasn't even anger, it was simply truth. Andy swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to argue, to fight back with some clever remark about journalism or integrity or how little she cared about fashion. But the words stuck in her chest. The truth was, she didn't care about fashion. But Miranda had shown her that fashion didn't care whether she cared, shaped her world anyway. Her hands gripped the sweater tighter as though the wool itself might give her answers. All she saw now was the chain Miranda had described. Designers sketching in dim studios, models walking across runways, critics whispering into notepads, buyers negotiating over racks of samples. A vast machine turning, silently, endlessly, until a girl like her, someone far outside this polished universe, ended up pulling. a cerulean sweater off a clearance shelf, without knowing she had been caught in the current. Miranda's voice returned. Softer this time, but no less commanding. You believe you are separate, Andrea. You think you stand above it, untouched. But you are not above. You are already inside. Andy lifted her eyes. Miranda's gaze was steady, cool, merciless. For a moment, Andy felt stripped bare, as though her stubbornness, her disdain, her attempts at superiority had all been peeled away. What remained was uncomfortable honesty, and then came the final strike. Miranda leaned forward slightly, her tone colder than before, but so calm it almost sounded kind. You may think this has nothing to do with you, but what you fail to grasp is that what you wear, every choice you make, is already decided by people like me. Even your sweater was no accident. The words landed like a verdict, not loud, not cruel, just inescapable. Andy felt the room tilt. For the first time since stepping foot into runway, she understood that she wasn't just an outsider mocking a world she didn't respect. She was a participant. Unwilling, perhaps, unaware. Definitely, but a participant nonetheless. The assistants around the office finally moved again. Papers shuffled. Keyboards clicked, the rhythm of work returning as though Miranda's lesson had been a storm passing through. Yet for Andy, the air still carried lightning. She looked down at the sweater once more, and in that quiet second, she saw not a garment, not a color, but a system of invisible strings. Strings tied to her choices, her assumptions, her very identity, and the realization cut deep. She wasn't above this world. She never had been. Her silence spoke louder than any apology. Miranda didn't need thanks, didn't need acknowledgement. The point had been made, carved into Andy's understanding like a permanent scar. For the first time, Andy felt something she hadn't before. Not contempt, not rebellion, but awe. Awe at the precision of Miranda's mind, the breadth of her influence, and the terrifying truth that no one, not even Andy Sachs, could walk through life untouched by fashion. Miranda reached for her glasses again, sliding them onto her face as though the lesson had concluded. She turned her gaze back to the papers on her desk, her interest in Andy evaporating in an instant. To Miranda, the conversation was finished. The education had been delivered, but for Andy, the education had only just begun. The cerulean sweater no longer mocked her, it haunted her. The elevator doors slid shut, and the office noise vanished, cut away like a scene change. Andy stood alone in the mirrored box sweater folded over her arm. The reflection staring back wasn't the girl who had walked into runway this morning. Her eyes were sharper now, quieter, like someone who had seen the map of a world she'd mocked and realized she'd been standing on it the whole time. The elevator hummed downward. Floor numbers blinked past. Andy replayed every word from Miranda, not as insults, but as instructions written in ice. It's not just blue. Cerulean, a chain, a current, a system. She could still feel the weight of that system, not as a cage, but as a machine with levers she hadn't known existed. She exhaled, slow and steady, as if testing a new voice. Outside, city breath taxis, crosswalks, window displays with glossy mannequins frozen mid-stride. The world she always believed was separate from fashion now looked stitched together by it. Colors in shop windows echoing runways. Office workers in coats, chosen by buyers she'd never see. Students carrying bags copied from designs that had once walked under bright lights and camera flashes. She watched a passerby in a jacket so close to her sweater's shade that it felt like a sign she wasn't outside the stream. She'd been swimming with it all along, eyes closed. She moved down the sidewalk. The camera of your faceless video tight on steps, hands the soft fold of the sweater under her arm. No faces, only motion and intention. The voiceover calm, reflective, steadier, now guides the moment. I thought I was above it. I was not. I thought I chose it. I did not. But now that I see it, I can learn it. The newsroom. Dreaming headlines, truth to power didn't vanish. It evolved. If fashion could shape desire, perhaps it could also shape attention. If a shade like cerulean could travel from a drawing table to a clearance rack, And ideas could travel too. Someone smart enough learned how to guide them. That thought lit a small flame in her chest, bright enough to warm the cold left. By Miranda's lesson, she stopped at a street corner and unfolded the sweater. In the light, the color deepened, clean, confident, a sky before a storm. She traced the hem with her thumb and pictured the chain again. Sketches, samples, fittings, reviews, orders, shipments, sales. Each link a decision, each decision a vote. For what the world would see next, she wasn't angry anymore. She was curious. Beneath curiosity, resolve. Cut to a quiet apartment interior. Sweater is laid flat on a table. Books stacked beside it. Fashion history's old runway archives. Anthologies of designers she once only knew as background noise. A notebook opens. She writes a single word in bold letters. Cerulean. Under it, lines branch out like a mind map. Runway cycles. Who decides? Buyers, editors, critics' data, trend reports. Street style, manufacturing, labor, ethics. The pen moves faster. Frame holds close on ink and paper. No faces, just the work beginning. Miranda's voice distant memory, not present threads through the silence. You are already inside. Andy smiles to herself, a small private smile that belongs to people who have chosen a path they didn't. Expect to walk. If she was inside, then she could navigate. If she could navigate, she could influence. And if she could influence, she could change things, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually.